Here today. So welcome to Cinema for the Culture, a signature event by the African Film and Arts Foundation. My name is Fred Zucule, and I am the current assistant intern at the foundation. So Cinema for the Culture aims to demystify the African continent by bringing positive, relatable images to the big screen and celebrating the resurgence of a love and interest in African pop culture. Today we are pleased to have with us here Tanzanian-American filmmaker Ekwa Msangi, director of Farewell Amor, who will be in discussion with Aika Swai, PhD candidate at University of Cape Town in South Africa. So I will invite our founder to give a brief introduction. So looking forward to this interesting conversation that's about to come up. Hello, hello.
Hello.
Hi. Hi.
This IG line is always so weird to me. Yeah, my God, I can't see my whole face.
Think about it. I've been talking to myself for 5 minutes.
Okay. So are you done with the introductions?
Yes, I will hand it over to you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Hello. I'm not sure how I'm looking, or because on my end it looks weird. So I'm just going to go, oops. Yeah. Okay. Let me not jinx it. Okay. Did you introduce the guests, Ekwa and Aika?
I was going to leave that up to you. Yes.
Okay. All right. So, hi everyone. My name is Moji Shinoiki. I'm the oh, excuse me 1 minute. This thing is not stable. Okay, hold on. Okay. You can tell that we're not used to doing this. It's like I think this is my third live.
Oh, wow.
Okay. All right, I think that's stable now. Hi everyone. So my name is Moji Shinoiki. I'm the founder of the African Film and Arts Foundation. And today we're pleased to have with us Tanzanian-American filmmaker Ekwa Msangi, director of Farewell Amor, who will be in discussion with Aika Swai, a PhD candidate at the University of Cape Town, South Africa. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the foundation. We're a 501c3 nonprofit media arts organization, and our mission is to create a platform to promote, showcase, and support content that depicts Africa and its diaspora family in all its brilliance. One of our main goals is to engage the younger generation in discussions around film production as they are future storytellers. With that being said, I want to thank Fred for being here, and he's interning with us over the summer as our program assistant, and he's hit the ground running. He started this week, and we've put him to work already. And he's doing a good job, so thank you, Fred.
Thank you.
So just a brief introduction about our guest, Ekwa Msangi, and Ekwa, I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly, is from Tanzania-American, and she's a filmmaker whose award-winning and critically acclaimed feature film, Farewell Amor, premiered in competition at the 2020 Sundance Film Festival. Ekwa has written and directed for both TV and film, and along her journey has been awarded the New York Women in Film and TV Directors Award, the 2020 Durban International Film Festival for Best Screenplay, and was named a 2020 Sundance Institute Momentum Fellow, as well as a 2020 BAFTA Breakthrough. Most recently, Ekwa won the 2021 Indie Spirit Someone to Watch Award and resides in New York. So we'll be bringing Ekwa on in a few minutes. Our moderator for this evening is Aika Swai, and I think I got that because I wrote it down phonetically. And she grew up in Tanzania and came to the United States for higher education. She holds a master's degree from the Department of Modern Thought and Literature at Stanford University and is currently completing her PhD, at the Department of English Literary Studies at the University of Cape Town. Her research and teaching interests include contemporary African, Caribbean, and American Indian literature, and how to teach this literature in multicultural classrooms. So we're going to bring on both our guests now. I'm going to hop off. Fred is going to be there in the background, but this is really about a conversation between Aika, and Ekwa. So I'm going to hop off, and I guess you can request the guests to come in now, Fred.
For sure.
Okay.
I will do just that.
If you need me, I'm here.
Of course, I'll just be here in the background.
Maybe should say hi before I hop off. Hello. Aika, hi. Hi. So I'm going to hop off. I think actually you can bring Ekwa in. Let me say hi to her and then I'll hop off.
Hello, hello.
Hello.
That's a nice picture, actually, of four of us. Look cute.
I like this look. I agree.
All right, I'll speak to you later. Bye.
Okay. Aika, it's been so long. Hi.
Hi, how is it?
So happy to see you. My goodness, this is so momentous. I was just thinking about it as Majishola was introducing us, that we met when I did my first short film, and now we're meeting again with my short feature film, with my first feature film. It's really special.
Yes, exactly. I'm delighted that you remember me because it's at least 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah,
2011. Yeah, it's exactly that.
Wow.
I absolutely remember you. We had a wonderful time. So happy to be with you. Thank you for moderating this conversation.
Yeah, no, I'm excited, and for several reasons. So I'm excited to see you again. I was blown away by the film, and it's such a cool way to connect again. It's great.
Yeah.
Do you think we're ready? Should we start talking about
Yes, you can definitely go ahead. I'm just going to make some brief awkward transitions so that you don't have to stare at my face the whole time. But yeah, so you can go ahead and get started. I'm just going to move a little bit. Oh God, oh God. Yes, forgive the technical sounds in the background. It's almost over.
Not at all.
There we go. Just going to leave it at that.
Okay.
Wow. Well, I mean, the obvious question is, when did you start? Because especially if one knows New York, if I look at the film in terms of just the number of scenes that you had to work out, and it's an enormous amount of work. So when did this come about?
When did the story come about? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, when did you start? Like, when did you conceptualize and begin the process of you wrote the script yourself?
I did. Yeah, it's been a long road. I mean, the script itself took about a year and a half to write, the feature script itself. However, the concept for the story had kind of been brewing for a while. The story is inspired by an aunt and an uncle of mine who were married in Tanzania in the 90s, and my uncle got a student visa to come to the US and came with every intention of bringing my aunt and cousin right behind him. And, to this day, 2021, they're still in the process of applying for visas and getting rejected. And so there was a period, probably in the early 2000s, where, they had made another attempt at applying for the visas and feeling really hopeful. And I was just thinking about, like, wow, it's been so long. At that point, it had been at least, 10, almost 15 years. And I was thinking about, like, what would it be like for my uncle? So I had this image of him at the arrivals hall, like waiting for my auntie, and what would he be thinking, and how would he feel, and what would he say to them? Would he recognize, just like kind of trying to put myself in his shoes and imagining what would happen. And then what, because my aunt and my cousin have also had all of these long anticipation of reuniting and coming to America, and on the continent, anywhere in the world, really, people have such big ideas about what life is like in America. And so after all of these fantasies, and like, oh, we're going to live here and our life is going to look like this, and you know, everything's going to be solved. All the problems will be solved, you know. What would it be like for them? And so that's kind of where the film started, where the idea started. And it's an imagination, you know, as I mentioned, they are not reunited. My real life relatives have not yet been reunited. So this is just an imagination of what would happen or what could happen if that were to take place. So it's been a long road in terms of just thinking about it. And then, you know, came my involvement with dance at the time and, you know, my love for Angolan dance and culture and wanting to add that as a layer as well. And so, yeah, that was the journey.
Yes. So when you mentioned that, that actually answers the big question I had about this film. Why Angola? Why Angolans in Tanzania and then in New York? What was
Yeah.
your thinking around?
Well, it really stemmed from just the love of, at the time I was doing a lot of Kizomba dancing in New York. And what I love about Kizomba as a couples dance that's different from others couples dances like salsa or bachata or something else is that it really depends on the couple that's dancing being connected in a certain, having a certain level of connection in order to know what the leader of the dance wants the follower to do. So you can't phone it in. You know, salsa, I've danced with people who are having whole conversations with somebody else while they're like moving you because you're doing the same thing. It's the same foot pattern over and over again. But for Kizomba, you actually really have to focus and, and really kind of be in tune together to a certain degree. And I just thought that was such an interesting metaphor for this couple that used to be in sync and now they're not and are trying to find their sync again. Meanwhile, he might be in sync with somebody else, you know, with his dance partner who he probably fell in love with because, you know, not on purpose, not because he was looking for somebody, but because that's what happens sometimes in life and in love and certainly with dance. And it's just so wanting to just celebrate that. I love the fact that we have romantic dances from the continent. I think when most people, certainly here in the US, think of African dances, you know, you think of sort of drums
Yeah.
and the fertility dance and whatever, which is great. You know, we have those too. But, you know, what comes to mind aren't romantic couples dances. And I just love that we have authentic couples dances. And also just showcasing, you know, both of us are from Tanzania. On the East Coast in Tanzania in particular, we grew up with so much Congo and so much Angola and so much, you know, dance from that, like serious music from that part of the continent that, you know, like if you don't know Congolese music, like you don't know African music, I'm sorry, that's just what it is. And living in the time now where, you know, every sort of slight reference to African music goes straight to Nigeria, which is like, Nigerian music is great. However, we have whole other genres, you know, there's so much that really could be explored. So wanting to sort of, you know, just bring that in because why not? Hey, equal. So there's a lot of different layers and, you know, also with Tanzania's history having hosted so many people from other countries experiencing war, escaping war, conflict, or, you know, whatever situations, it didn't seem unfathomable for me or to me to have had a family from Angola reside in Tanzania for a while and what that means and just wanting to have a bit of that discussion. You know, there's so much that we don't know about, there's so much that we don't know about the continent, period. But especially some of the countries that are not Anglophone speakers, you know, and not even Francophone speakers. I think the Lusophone speakers get sort of last pick when it comes to attention in this part of the world, mostly, I imagine, because of language differences. So it was an interesting challenge to take on and wanting to kind of try and do it
It,
justice.
Yeah. No, there are a lot of things to do justice because it's a family that escaped the war.
Yeah.
So I can see how you had to acknowledge the War
Mm-hmm.
and how specific it was. And then the challenge, I mean, the challenge of language I'm going to ask you about in a moment. But then this challenge of, okay, now they have a history in Dar es Salaam, and then they're in New York, and I mean, what was really refreshing for me is to show how there is this transnational element
Mm-hmm.
within this family, and we often we sanitize our depiction of African families in the U.S. by sort of putting them from one place only. It turns out that within Africa, there's a lot of movement and a lot
Yeah.
of multiple identities that
Yeah.
this family alone holds, and so that is challenging. And then you took on the challenge of dealing with religion and
Mm-hmm.
Christianity, and so you actually you tackled a lot of also sort of that ethical realm of the politics of representation. You know, how do you show respect to Angola, and then how do you show respect to, you know, Dar is very particular with it. Um, yeah, so uh, maybe talk a little bit about language, because one of the choices you have to make obviously is the language of the script, the language of the dialogue,
Mm-hmm.
and the accent, because you chose English and you chose not to not to deal with subtitles and all of that, and then the accent and how to train the different actors who are all from totally different corners of the diaspora.
Yeah.
So to talk a little bit about that, how did you direct them?
Well, I mean, language is something I wanted to be very particular about as best as I could, you know. And I told my producer from the beginning, if I was to be real, if I were to be really very honest about the script, they would be speaking in Portuguese for 90% of this story, because it doesn't make sense for an African family who speak an African language to feel more comfortable speaking English to themselves at home. That doesn't make any kind of sense. Um, Especially in this context, you know, maybe if they've grown up in an English speaking setting or blah, blah, blah. But in this sense, it actually doesn't really make sense. However, I don't speak Portuguese. And it would be a lot harder to sell this film if I say had the whole script translated and found Portuguese speaking actors. Like, I probably would not be able to make this film. I certainly would not be able to sell it in the US. So that was a concession I had to make, was like, okay, they're practicing their English because there's, you know, sort of living in a English speaking country, which is not unheard of. You know, I think that's something that one can live with, but they would not be speaking the Queen's English. And so what we did do was we hired a dialect coach, and we managed to get really, really sort of granular about, okay, so they're from Angola. What kind of accents do they have? Are they, you know, college educated? Are they from the north? Are they from the south? Are they, you know, Catholic university versus local university? Are they this? Are they that? You know, and we kind of had to form some sort of backstory for them and make decisions about what their education level must have been, you know, what their backstory might have been, where they went. You know, in the story, both parents did go to school. University. So what kind of universities, where did they come from? And then the fact that um, Esther and Jamie, the mother and daughter, moved to Tanzania, which, you know, they would have been kind of in an expat community, or, you know, so they'd know a little bit of Swahili, but they'd probably be trying to speak some English as well. So, you know, just trying to mix it up a little bit, but really kind of training them with the accent so that at least that sounds somewhat authentic to who they might be, because I couldn't do it all in Portuguese. We did once I started working with the actors, you know, they were sort of like, yeah, it doesn't make sense that they wouldn't speak any kind of Portuguese. We actually do need to incorporate some Portuguese here. And so we did. Um, we got help and we had someone help translate a few phrases, but I didn't want to use subtitles because I just find that so patronizing sometimes. And so I decided, okay, we're going to do it in such a way that where the response comes, you can figure out what he's saying. And it was a challenge. It wasn't something that went down easily with my team. I did get a lot of pushback and a lot of worry around like, is this a good idea? Will people get it? Because there's work required. And I had to have some conversations with my team to be like, I get it. And also, I mean, the rest of the world have been bending our ears to try and understand Bostonian English and, the Valley accent and a Southern accent. And like, we do the work, like we figure things out. You can figure things out. It turns out that because of the year that we didn't really have much of a theatrical run. It's been mostly online where you have closed captioning. So at the end of the day, you can sort of put on captions and figure out what they're saying that way. But it was a very specific choice to have them, speak in a language where you may not quite understand it from hearing it, but you're seeing what they're doing and you're hearing maybe the response, and you can put two and two together and figure out what's going on. And we were just so delighted when we did have our theatrical release or our world premiere at Sundance. People got it. People actually did understand. They might not have understand every single word, but they got enough to know the story and to feel moved by it, so that was really affirming for us.
Yes. No, I mean, I think the one scene where I noticed the impact, and I think I understood your choice, your production value behind it, is the scene where they it looks a little bit like that's the first time they make love, and it's after they go out for dinner, right? And
Yes.
It's a pristine scene with, I mean, just the colors and the angle of the camera and the way it's just so delicate. And then there's of course the bed sheets,
Yeah.
which Esther had got, she got them from the donation box, and he recognizes them.
Yeah.
And so in that moment of extreme anguish, that's when he goes to his mother tongue.
Yeah.
So I thought that was very deliberate. That was sort of a almost like a trigger of something that is as suppressed as his childhood, perhaps. So I thought that was a really magical choice to make, to put the mother tongue front and center in that moment of the whole world fell apart for him in that moment.
Yeah.
And I can't think of another scene where it was so profound. I mean, you talk about music, and I think, of course, the film is about dance because of Sylvia, but the soundtrack, hey, the soundtrack of this film is something that I want to put on a repeat playlist, because I just noticed that I know so many of those songs, and I've never really wondered what the lyrics might be. And so let me ask you about this one scene. Again, I'm still working on this language issue. There's a scene where Sylvia and Walter, I think they're driving and they're listening to this excruciatingly beautiful song, and I've known it for years.
Yeah.
And then Sylvia says, "Oh, don't you remember she remembers Dar now, the expatriate community in Dar, and she says they would listen to this song and they would cry and cry and cry." And so tell me about your choice of music. Is this and how did you really find, like, what was behind that scene? How did you create that?
That's a great question. And I will also give a shout out to Walter and Tare Gumambahomwine, who's our lead actor, who really fought for that climax scene that you were talking about with the language, and it was just like, there's no way that I'd be that shocked and speak in English. Like, we'd have to do this in Portuguese. And so he really fought for that. And I'm so glad that he did. So thank you, Ntare. You know, as I was doing my research for this film and wanting to, I mean, I have my experience with, you know, I was born in the U.S. My parents were students at Stanford. They were part of the Student African Student African something Society Association,
yes.
whatever it was, and Stanford African Student Association. That's what it was. And so there would be Africans from all over the continent, and that was, you know, the 80s, the early 80s. You know, everyone was sort of end of apartheid, and you know, so they'd have these sort of monthly parties. And I remember as a young person watching, you know, our parents, our elders dancing to, you know, Billy Abel and whoever it was, Mario, and just, you know, Virunga, and being transported to this time and this place. And, oh, remember the time we were on the beach, and remember this, and, you know, just having these sort of transformations, you know, as we were watching them. And for those of, you know, there was many of us who had been born in the US, and so we didn't know specifically what they were talking. We hadn't experienced what they were talking about, but we could see the effect that it was having on our parents, and that it meant something to them, and that they would constantly be like, "You'll know about this one day, my child. You know, one of these days I'll take you back to Africa so you too can smell the earth," and, you know, whatever it was. And so that was in some way how I learned about Africa. I learned about my parents' connection to them, to the continent, and to these movements, and to other Africans, and the things that we shared, and Africans who had been to other countries before they had come to the US, and et cetera, et cetera. You know, so I know what that was like for me, but I wanted to understand what it was like for, you know, luckily I didn't come from a war-torn country at that time. My parents were not in the US because of a war. They were there for, you know, they made a choice due to education. And so I was doing a bunch of research online, and I found a video of a woman who had been born in Portugal when her parents, you know, fled the war and had gone to Portugal. And we're talking about some of the music and the musicians that had kept that memory alive for them, for the community. One being Bonga Kwenda, who's, you know, who was in exile, was sort of in trouble with the government, and his music was so symbolic of the freedom that they were fighting for. And so I looked up all his music, of course. And she talked about this experience where she was watching, you know, similar to how I was watching her parents, you know, at these socials, crying and crying for the motherland and having all this longing and stuff like that. And so I just thought that was so, I don't know, just so poignant about, because again, you know, when you think about, and especially at the time that I was working on this script, which was 2017, 2018, where there was just so much rhetoric around foreigners and all the horrible things foreigners are doing in this country, and they're here to take all our resources and take our healthcare and our children and our blah, 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 you know, all of these things. And we never really stopped to think about what foreigners go through, you know, what they have to give up, excuse me, what they have to give up in order to be in these countries, whether it be in the US or anywhere else really in the world. And that longing, you know, nobody prefers to leave everybody and everything that they know and love to be in a foreign place where they're not being treated right. Nobody wants that, if they had a choice. And so as a young person, what does that feel like, watching your elders, watching your parents grapple with these issues where they're making a better life, but then there's all this longing and saudade, you know, for the homeland, but then it's also a certain homeland that may not exist anymore, and it's complicated, you know. So it was a little bit of my personal experience, and you know, and then I did the research to find out which kinds of music, which particular musicians would have spoken to somebody from an Angolan context.
It's stunning. It's really, really stunning. And it's profound how all characters miss Angola, and then there's also this longing for Dar es Salaam and Tanzania, and so again, to make it more complex, that you can long for more than one place
Yeah.
within Africa, and
Yeah.
yeah. Well, let me ask you then about the one part of, I guess, the it's not a plot question. It's really it's a question about desire. It's a theme question, and you know, I adore Walter. I adore him. I can't get mad at him. He's just gorgeous in every single way.
Yeah, he is.
But if I wasn't looking at the film, and if I didn't see all the, you know, just the way the camera loves black skin in this film, and then I would think about it like, whoa, Walter, what about this other woman,
I
right?
know.
This
Linda.
and I would actually have a problem with him. I mean, because it's so she so abruptly leaves the film. You know, there's the encounter in the hospital, and then she draws the line. How did you approach that? Because you know, it's a loaded topic. But at the same time, 17 years, and I think it comes really through when the men talk, when Walter and his you know, his co-workers, the drivers, when they talk about it, everybody knows that 17 years is too long to be faithful. So there is sort of an understanding of that, and yet so how did you deal with that?
You know, it's one of those New York stories that it doesn't even have to be a New York story. I'm sure it's anywhere in the world, but seeing that I live in New York, I can't tell you how many cab drivers I've met who have just talked about, you know, their family here and their family there, and they go back to wherever it is on the continent for, you know, 6 months out of the year or 3 months out of the year, and sort of catch up with their kids and their family. And then they come here, and oftentimes they've married somebody in order to stay here, to stay in the country for paperwork, for, you know, and so it's not necessarily a secret from their family at home. You know, oftentimes they've spoken to their wives and they're like, listen, this is the easiest way for me to actually make money and support you is to marry a local person and, you know, do something else. And so that idea of fidelity is complex. It's not as simple as, well, if you love me, then your whole life is, you know, that I almost want to say it's a very middle class idea of sort of like what a happy family will look like. We get married and we live together for the rest of our lives and we have no problem, you know, we live together. Well, what happens for the millions of people who aren't able to do that? And it's not necessarily because of war or this, that, and the other, you know, and so I imagined a lot of Walter's story where he didn't go after Linda with the intention of marrying her or being with her. You know, he was trying to have some respite in his New York life and loved dancing and met this woman and she loved dancing and she's also kind of a foreigner. You know, in our minds, we had her coming from Ghana. She's, you know, she's a nurse in New York. And so they were friends. And he told her from the get-go, you know, I have a family and I'm trying to bring them over. And maybe she was very supportive and helpful of that. And he would talk about Sylvia and show pictures and, you know, and bit by bit, you know, after 10 years even, I'm sure at some point, you're almost kind of like, yeah, I'm hopeful that this will happen, but I don't know that it actually will. I don't know that we will be together. You know, it might seem like a little bit of a dream. And, you know, and we also were just thinking about, you know, he had sort of like the typical story where he met another woman and fell in love with her and sort of put his energy towards her as opposed to putting it towards the family, although he did put energy towards his family too. But Esther kind of had an affair too. Just that her affair is with Jesus. And therefore it's not, considered as salacious. You know, I mean, that's where she put her energy with. And she had to, you know, you can understand, like, she's in a foreign country. She has a young daughter. She doesn't know what's going to happen and when it's going to happen. And so, yeah, she fell in love with Jesus. That became her husband. That became her support. And his support became Linda. And that's how they were able to survive. And so then all of a sudden, this thing that he's been talking about for years and years comes true. I actually, while we were on the journey of making this feature, in order to sort of help get the support, the financial support and everything to get it together, my producer and I decided to make a short prequel to the film called Farewell Amor, which is the moment where Linda comes to the house to pick up her things and drop off the keys. And, you know, and that's, what was that like? He has to sort of be like, oh, I love you so much, but also, guess what? You know, things are going to change. And they've talked about it, but now it's like a reality that they hadn't quite expected. And so how does that go? You know, they're both trying to do the right thing. He is trying to honor his marriage vows and his family. And she knew, you know, she can't say, like, you lied to me. He didn't lie to her. She knew that that he was a taken man. And so she's trying to do the right thing by bowing out of the relationship, but they're in love, you know. So there's some real heartbreak there, and just wanting to be able to show a man having like real actual heartbreak and not over just something frivolous.
Ooh, all right. So I want to talk about Jesus. If we have time, I'll come back to Jesus. But let me ask you, so the final scene, I want to know if is it a happy ending, really, given everything you just said? I mean, realistically speaking, if he was clearly in love with Linda, I mean, and there was so much sweet chemistry between them in the few scenes that where we see both of them. And now we end the film with this family of three having tea, which is a rather British thing to do, which is, you know, so there comes the post-colonial. Tell me about your decision to end it that way. Were there ever any other options? Like, did you consider ending it any other way?
I did not consider ending it any other way that I liked. There are other ways it could have ended, but I didn't like the options that at least came to my mind. And for me, you know, I didn't want it to be too convenient where they're like, and now we're really going to live happily ever after. Because the beginning kind of starts like, yay, we're done. Okay. Our problems are solved. We're together. Yay, the end, you know. But it's not the end, it's a beginning. So I didn't want the end to sort of be like a Disney ending. Hey, Manuel, my awesome choreographer just joined. And I didn't want it to be melodramatic where, you know, I didn't want to make a decision for them. You know, I felt like it's a little too early to make a decision as to where this is going to go. So to me, it felt like if we came back with a sequel to this and they were not together, you would be like, well, you know, I mean, they had a lot that they were dealing with, and this poor family, you know, she did this and that, you know, like I understand why they wouldn't be together. Or if we came back with a sequel and they were together, you'd be like, you know, this family, they really tried. They had a lot to deal with, and they really put their best into that. And, you know, like you could understand sort of both sides of the coin, I guess. Where it's more of instead of a decision, like we're definitely going to be together and married for the rest of our lives, I think it's more of a decision that we're going to try. We're going to try. We've made a decision to be present. We've made a decision to let go of the crutches that brought us here, because everybody came with their little crutch that that thank God for their crutches. That's how they were able to get here in the first place. And now we've realized this in this tiny New York apartment, there is not space for us and our crutches. And so we're going to have to scarily get rid of the crutch and figure out how to live together without our crutches. And so that was the decision that I felt comfortable with, them sort of deciding that we're going to try without our crutches and see what happens.
Mhm.
A little bit of a cliffhanger.
Yes, it is a cliffhanger. Nice. I could talk for hours. Let me see if anyone in the audience has questions. I forgot about that part.
Yeah.
A lot of
I'll
people have
also
joined by now.
proceed to reinsert myself after all that. Hello, I'm back.
Hi. Hi.
Hi.
Welcome.
That was a wonderful conversation, I must say. I hadn't thought this deeply about Farewell Amor, and I think this conversation really opened up a lot of questions and made me notice a lot more of what I appreciate of the film. But also waiting for audience questions. I was going to mention I'm from Mozambique, and so like hearing, and I lived in Kenya as well, so I also like migrated, and so Cinema for the Culture, its main mission is to bring up relatable images, and this felt like a very, very relatable story of immigration across Lusophone countries to Anglophone countries, and then to a big country like the United States, and kind of the tensions that come with wrestling with a multicultural African identity in itself, one that borrows multiple histories as it is. So I actually had just a couple questions about how did the cast get involved? How did you find these people?
Yeah, thank you. One of my favorite topics is to talk about my cast because I love them so much. Ntare is a good friend of mine. Ntare, who plays Walter, is a fellow East African. He's from Uganda, and we've had our films play. He's also an experimental filmmaker, and we've had our short films played together at festivals in the past. And so having met each other, we had kind of threatened to work together for years and years. And so when this opportunity came up, I invited him, and asked him if he would join the cast, and he graciously accepted, and we were just so happy to have him as our lead. For Zainab Jal, who plays Esther, I've known her work. I've seen her perform. She's very big in the New York theater scene. Super, super talented. We kind of run into each other at parties here and there, but I had never known her personally. So she and Jamie Lawson, who plays Sylvia, came through our casting director. We worked with Rebecca Dealey of Christie Street Casting, and she brought both of them in, and they were just so excellent. Zainab, I feel like because of the kinds of content that is normally written for African women or African mothers, wives, that kind of a character, there tends to be sort of an assumption of what that person might be and how they might act and look like and things like that. And Zainab was just able to kind of like just cut through that and just give us something that was completely different. So I loved working with her. Jamie had just graduated. It was her graduation week from Juilliard drama school when she auditioned for us, and so this was her absolute first project that she did with us, and then went on to book the Batman right afterwards. So lucky us. And she was so incredible. So it was really wonderful to work with them, to kind of be able to bring them together. We were doing Sylvia first. We cast for Sylvia first because that character needed not only accent ability, but dance ability, and wasn't somebody that I could think of a name. So we were searching, so we canvassed the city, a whole bunch of dance schools, and printed out flyers. We're looking for dancers who can act or actors who can dance, and found her. And then we had Ntare. So then it was like, all right, now we need to find a mom that can make it look like they actually belong in the same family. And so that's how that happened. And then everybody else came through casting, except for Nana Mensah, who plays Linda, and whose directorial debut just happened this week at Tribeca Film Festival, and she won an award for Best New
What a
Director, which is
cast!
fantastic. I know, she's incredible. She was in our short prequel as the girlfriend, Linda, so I recast her in the feature, which I was so glad to be able to do. And then Marcus Scribner and Joie Lee both came through casting as well, which is great.
Wow, wow. Thank you for that answer. While I
Yeah.
hope if there are any audience questions, please type them, comment them. But as they comment, I wanted to ask about the distribution of the film. Right now it's on Amazon Prime and it's on Hulu. And I wanted to ask about the distribution plan for the continent, or if there's anything in mind for that.
Yeah, I mean, our distributor is IFC Films in North America. I was going to say North Africa. That doesn't make sense. In North America. You know, our initial plan, or, you know, sort of what we thought would we come out of Sundance and get some big fancy somebody who would like distribute worldwide and we'd be like done. Of course, was so much of that was disrupted by the pandemic last year. But, you know, so we ended up having 3 different distributors for different parts of the world. So we have IFC Films for North America, we have Netflix for Africa, and we have Mubi for the rest of the world. And we have somebody else for Israel, I think. But all 3 of those have proven to be distributors who just really, really love the film. And that's been so, so important for us, you know, especially with a film with, you know, all these different languages, and we don't have subtitles, and it's not an issue-driven films, which is sort of like the typical way that African films tend to be showcased, which is like the film about the most excellent person ever, or the most downtrodden person ever, you know, the person we can rally behind and be like, say no to Boko Haram, or, you know, whatever it is. We don't have that film. And so you really have to just think about us as a film, which, as straightforward as that sounds, in this industry is a little bit of a challenge when it comes to films with people of color. Just thinking about our films as films, you know, in terms of how to market them and promote them. And so we're really pleased to have the partners that we have. We're hoping we have some deals in the works for a DVD release at some point, possibly by next year. And just kind of, you know, it's a little tricky because traditionally you have a theatrical release for several months and then you go to the platforms, the Amazons, the Hulus, the Netflixes. But now since we already went to platforms because of the pandemic, we can't really do proper theatrical release. So we're still kind of doing a few festivals here and there. So it's a little bit of a hybrid, which, you know, I can't really complain about, given the fact that we even had a theatrical anything. You know, there's a lot of films that were released in the past 15 months that didn't get to see a theater at all. So we're just so fortunate that we even, you know, had our premiere at Sundance and had 6 amazing screenings with a live audience, which is amazing.
Wow, wow, wow. What a story. How is the film funded?
We got equity investors. I mean, we did get quite a few grants, soft grants to start us off, which was great. We probably raised about maybe $80,000 or so from New York Film, NIFA and NYCHA and Jerome Foundation and Tribeca and, you know, like a whole bunch of other people that helped us to kind of like get started and, you know, do our legal stuff and get a casting director attached and, you know, those kinds of things. And then we pitched the project to investors. We got, you know, the one investor who really loved it and was able to convince this other investor that, you know, because he loved it, maybe they should take a second look. And then they came on. And And then they were like, all right, we might need some other investors to join the bucket. So at the end of the day, we ended up having, I think, six investors. Again, it's all very, very tricky and complicated, or it can be, but we were so lucky and so fortunate that our investors worked really well together, because that can also be an issue when it comes time to sell the film. If you have people who don't work well together, and then they're like beefing as to what to do with the film and who should take it and what we should do and blah, blah, blah. And they were just like so lovely, so lovely. They're all people that we definitely want to work with again. So that's how we raised the money.
Oh, I see. I do have some audience questions that I'll put forward before we end. One of them is, do you see this as a love story? And if so, why is it important to create cinematic African love stories?
I do see it as a love story on many, many levels. I mean, a love story, you know, in terms of what the characters are going through, but a love story of Africa and African culture and African people. My love story of, you know, which I hope to make many, many love stories about, because I love African culture so much, and music and just people. I love people. And to me, that is why, you know, the answer about why is that important, because we didn't get that, and we still don't get that. You know, we have so many trial and tribulation stories. We definitely have those. And, you know, we have trials and tribulations like everybody else, but somehow those are the only stories we get to see. We have so many sort of celebrate the one human being story, but we really don't have enough of just us, like being joyful, being loving, being complicated and grounded and multifaceted. You know, I certainly didn't grow up with that. I grew up in Kenya as well in the 80s and 90s, and we had all British stuff. Like, I grew up on the African continent and never got to see any African content ever, because this was also pre-Nollywood, pre-digital anything. And so, I mean, the idea of like, what do we look like? What do we look like when we're in love? What do we look like when we're making love? What do we look like when we are infatuated? What is our dating like? What is our courtship like? Like, I had no visual reference of any of those things other than what like Sweet Valley High does, and Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys, and like all these other characters.
Yeah.
Knew about them. I have no idea what we do, you know, and that's a problem for me. And so, yeah, for sure, this is a love story, and I plan to make many, many more.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. I can't wait to keep watching some of these love stories, because I love
Thank
that
you.
idea. And some other questions are there any projects that you have coming up?
I do. I'm not able to talk about them in much detail yet.
Oh,
But yeah, you know, I will say it's a wonderful time. There is a lot of, I've been making films for a long time, and I've been sort of trying to eke my little way into this industry for many, many years. And I can certainly attest to there being a real shift in how people are trying to think about Africa and the African story. And I had somebody ask me once, like, do I feel obligated to tell African stories? I don't feel obligated. I actually feel very honored to be able to do that. There's so much to do. Our continent is so huge. There's no way I can do it myself, for one. There's many other people. And thankfully, I'm not doing it by myself. There are many other African filmmakers who are doing it now. I'm just being recognized in this particular moment, in this particular corner of the world. But I'm just really pleased that some of the projects that are coming my way, in terms of some of the scripts that I'm seeing, that, you know, I mean, not all of them are amazing, but a good number of them are, or a good number of them are at least asking the question of like, how do we make sure that this is amazing? You know, this is a story, it feels interesting. What do you think? And I love being able to be in the position to say, oh, this is kind of problematic and this is why. Or this is problematic, but, if we remove this and add this or do this other thing, I can, this makes it a little better. And it's not just about Africans. Some of it's about women characters. Some of it's about, just specific things that I can speak to and I can give my perspective on, which is amazing considering that we've spent how many decades, how many centuries, at least a century, watching all of our lives through the lens of white men,
Yes.
older white men. So there's a lot of space and also a lot of work to do.
Yes.
So some of the projects that I have coming up, I'm working on a rewrite right now that I'm attached to direct as well as a feature film. It's a much bigger project than Farewell Amor, and it's an African-American story, which is a real honor for me. And, I'm finding that I'm using a lot of the same tools that I did for Farewell Amor in terms of really being able to dig into the specifics of language, culture, of, costume, of time period, of understanding the history. It's the same exact thing. And I think, for a lot of the films that I watched growing up about Africa that were so terrible and revolting, that's the thing that was missing, is that nobody even bothered to do the research. It's just people are like, yeah, you're African. Just, do some click language thing and wear these kente cloths and we'll be fine. It's like,
Wow. So much work they used to be doing back in the day. And on the note of there being more work to be done with various African stories to be told, I have a question for both of you, which is, what do you see either as the future of African cinema, or what advice do you have for upcoming creatives?
You want to go first, Aika?
Well, I mean, now with this 2020 thing that happened, and I'm calling in from Cape Town, where we have
Bless you.
barely just begun the vaccinations, and one thing that I'm noticing that there's a big demand for is really science fiction, like Afrofuturism, and just alternative ways for African film to depict African modernities, and sort of trying to imagine what kind of modernities would we have come up with if we hadn't been interrupted in by empire. And then another big thing around here is just the whole genre of music video and how that's expanded to. I think there's gonna be this new genre of African musical film coming up, and like figuring out how to make a musical that doesn't fall into the the blueprint of that Broadway sound type of thing. And the reason why I say that is that we're really trying to figure out how to deal with languages, and a country like South Africa with so many national languages, you have to really figure out how to make film that affirms as many identities as possible. And so what I'm seeing is that we have Soto and Zulu, and isiZulu, and also Venda, and folks have guts now to make film that can speak for itself, but without subtitles, and that's exciting. And I think what I'm picking up is that there is also still a lot of work to be done around memory work. And that goes back to that topic of trauma that we also talked about a little bit, Ekwa. How do you write into the archive? The archive is still a very hegemonic type of. It's the colonizer who created it, and so a lot of people, I think, are trying to figure out how to write into that archive with this idea of historical fiction, like halfway. You have to figure out the ethics of sticking true to history, but also imagining how things were. And we're at the very beginning of that. Yeah.
Wow.
I'm so glad you went first. You're so smart.
I'm just excited about African film.
Which is great. I agree with everything you said. I think that there's just so much possibility. I went to film school when, although it sounds like, decades ago, it was a decade ago. Um, it's so much has changed, because I was at the end of analog film, just when people were beginning to introduce digital film. So I literally had to relearn filmmaking once I left school because people weren't making films in the same way. And now with, the ease of being able to shoot on our phones and being able to edit on our phones and do all of these different things and load it up onto YouTube or TikTok or wherever else and distribute, it's changed a lot. It's changed how people think about production. Where it used to be this really sort of military style, like first we need to do this and da da da. We need to go get our like $3 to $5 million and then come back and have a casting director do this and have another person do that. And now it's just like me and my friend are doing this thing and blah, 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 and next thing you know, it's a hit. Um, which I think also really troubles the idea of not just distribution, marketing and distribution, but what does film mean almost? It's like film used to be it used to be a very specific place. We go to this dark room with four walls and then we sit there silently and at the end of it and that's what watching a film means. And we're experiencing it in so many different ways. So it's actually kind of hard to tell what to expect because we're literally changing by the minute. As we speak, somebody's probably figured something out that I have no idea about, which I think is great. And Africa has always been so quick to innovate, because we have to keep on our toes. We didn't have those tools to begin with. So we need to make things that adapt to where we are and what we're doing and the speed and the way in which we create, just like African heritage people, like we think about things in just different ways. We approach color and language and style and all of those things in a completely unique way. And so I don't really have a crystal ball to like say what will come, but I do know that some things, not even just one thing. I think that there'll be many different things that will come. And you can just see it even from like, there was Nollywood and then there's all these different other versions of Nollywood and people just doing kind of their own version of things that's in that style or style of production, but pertains to their personal circumstances. And I just, in terms of like what to say to young people, just I don't. I mean, I don't know that there anyone who is feeling held back by what the industry is, because I know it's very different on the continent than it is in the US, where, the rules have been entrenched for so long, it feels really difficult to work outside of that. And there's a lot of people who've kept it that way because that's how they make their money. Whereas on the continent, things are much different. So you just get your people, get your crew, your like actor friends, and do it. And don't get too caught up with like being a Kardashian or just like living, a real housewife kind of life. Like that stuff is not actually really that interesting. I think like what people have, the kind of stories that people have that I've encountered are just so much more interesting than trying to, because there's people who go into film because they want to get rich, because they want to be famous, because they want to be on a red carpet, which is, whatever. That's part of it. But there's a lot of work that comes before that. So fall in love with the work. Fall in love with the work first, and find some people that you love to work with that will make it a lot easier to do the work. And then just have fun and don't listen to like, oh no, we can't do it that way, or that's not how it should be done. Make up your own way. of how it should be done. We're the ones who are going to lead. We're the ones who are going to be showing people what can be done. I'm sure of that.
Yes, that's wonderful. I really like that idea of falling in love with the work. And I also wanted to borrow a phrase from Professor Lindiwe Dovi at the School of Oriental and African Studies, who said she speaks of African screen worlds rather than African cinema, like the multiple ways that people innovate how to put stories on screens, to create space within the idea of African cinema for video art, for virtual reality and augmented reality that's gaining popularity. And I think there's space to innovate across all these different screen worlds rather than just cinema and film. But one last question would be, what were one of your favorite moments in the making, writing, or shooting of the film?
Ooh, wow, favorite moments. There were lots of really intense moments. I mean, all the moments in terms of like, we're finding all of my people, and all of who came literally on the wings of angels to join this project and make it happen. I would say really like having our premiere was really amazing because we worked so hard and we were in such crazy deadlines to get this thing done from the time that we were writing it and pitching it, and then got investors interested, and I hadn't finished the script, and so I had to keep writing really fast, and it's like, oh, it's coming right now. And then we got the money together and we went straight into production, and then we finished production, and we had and we got into Sundance, and so we literally, like, it wasn't until the actual premiere that I was like, oh, I'm watching it with all these people. Wow. And being able to not only sort of take that in, but then also get people's reactions to this thing that, just a small huddle group of us had been working on for so long. And, really in the nuance, so you kind of forget what's important and what is meaningful in the script because, because you're editing it. Yeah. So to be able to see that reflected off of other people and hear their experiences, and not just African people, not even just Black people, like people from all over the world who've been sending me emails and just like, oh my God, I've had this experience watching your film, has been really, really amazing. And just, I'm forever grateful for that. Yeah.
Wow, that's wonderful. I have to say, I also had these wonderful experiences watching Farewell Amor. From here, feeling homesick, listening to a movie with Kizomba in it and people dancing to it correctly. I was like, that is what I want to see. So that was very exciting. I think the only other comparison would be Rafiki when they're in the club, and Small Axe by Steve McQueen.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
The second episode was just the party. Ooh.
Oof.
Yeah. Exactly. So I felt the same watching Farewell Amor. I was like, wow, who knew Kizomba could be that powerful? Actually, I did know, but it was great to watch on the screen.
To see it. Thank you.
Yeah, so I also just want to say thank you for both of you. This was a wonderful, wonderful conversation about a wonderful film.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
It was an honor to actually just witness this really like erudite conversation, because both of you are very, very intelligent, and it was wonderful to listen to.
Thank you, and thank you to Mojishola and African Film Arts, and to you, Aika. It's so wonderful to meet this way after so many years. Yeah, we'll definitely be in touch offline. Exactly.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you again. And
I know it's really late in South Africa, so have a good night.
Sleep well.
Thank you all. Thank you for everyone who came online.
Yes,
Appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, everybody. Thank you for coming to Cinema for the Culture, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.